They say nothing truly prepares you for the moment someone looks at you differently. Not with words, but with eyes that see straight through the surface. I thought I was just being a gracious hostess playing the role of the perfect wife. It was just dinner, just a polite evening with my husband's boss. But what happened that night stirred something I hadn't felt in years. Not guilt, not shame, but a quiet, unnerving awareness of myself. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far our little stories reach. My name is Sophia and I'm 52. I've been married to Ethan for 27 years. And if I had to describe our marriage in one word, it would be steady, not thrilling, not romantic in the candlelit sense, but solid, predictable. There's comfort in that, especially at this stage of life. You build routines. You grow into silence. You stop questioning the shape of things. That Friday morning, Ethan asked me almost casually if we could invite his new boss over for dinner. His name's Lucas, Ethan said while tying his tie in front of the mirror. Single, mid-50s, recently moved here. Thought it might be nice to show him some local hospitality. I nodded. Sure, why not? What does he like to beat? Not picky. I think he's quiet, polite. You'll like him. That evening, I pulled out the linen napkins I usually reserve for Thanksgiving. I don't know why. Maybe it was boredom. Or maybe some part of me needed to feel engaged, seen. I made baked salmon with lemon dill sauce, roasted asparagus, and a pureed goat cheese salad. The kind of dinner that says asterisk. I know what I'm doing in a kitchen, but I'm not trying too hard asterisk. When Lucas arrived, I was still in the kitchen. Ethan let him in, and I heard the front door close, followed by two male voices murmuring greetings. I came out wiping my hands on a towel, expecting someone older, maybe balding with a tired smile. But Lucas was not what I imagined. He stood taller than Ethan by a few inches with salt and pepper hair that looked intentional, not accidental. Broad shoulders, sharp jawline, and eyes that landed on mine with a quiet intensity. He was wearing a navy button-up, sleeves rolled just enough to show strong forearms. The kind of man you'd assume had someone waiting for him. Someone polished, someone exciting. Lucas, this is my wife Sophia. He stepped forward and extended a hand. Pleasure to meet you. His handshake was firm, his palm warm. His eyes held mine a beat too long. I smiled politely and said, "Dinner will be ready in just a few minutes. Please make yourself comfortable." We sat down not long after. The conversation was easy, mostly Ethan talking about work, Lucas occasionally adding a few dry, well-placed comments that made me laugh more than I should have. It wasn't flirtation. Not exactly. It was something subtler. Attention beneath the tablecloth. A pause before speaking. A glance held for just a breath too long. I noticed he barely touched the wine, but watched me carefully every time I reached for my glass. He asked about the house, the neighborhood, how long we'd lived here. Standard small talk, but it felt deliberate, like he was listening for something deeper in my answers. Later, Ethan excused himself to take a work call in the other room. I gathered plates and Lucas offered to help. I told him no, but he stood anyway, followed me into the kitchen, and leaned against the counter as I loaded the dishwasher. "You're a wonderful cook," he said. "I haven't had a meal that good in a long time." "Thank you," I said, not looking at him. I could feel his eyes on my back. "You make it look so easy. Hosting, managing everything. It's rare." I turned around then, half laughing. "It's just dinner. Nothing extraordinary." "That's where you're wrong." Our eyes met. For a moment the kitchen went quiet. No clinking of dishes, no hum from the fridge. Just that stillness, that unspoken understanding. He wasn't talking about the food or the evening. He was talking about me. And I foolishly maybe didn't look away. "Ethan's lucky," he added softly. But there was something in his voice. A note of something restrained. Admiration. Regret. I broke the gaze first. "He knows," I said almost automatically. But in truth I wasn't sure if Ethan did anymore. Not really. Not the way he used to. Lucas nodded once, then stepped back. "Thank you again, Sophia, for everything." I walked him to the door, and Ethan returned just in time to say goodbye. The two men shook hands, exchanged some quick final words, and then Lucas stepped out into the night, the porch light casting long shadows behind him. Ethan closed the door inside. "Nice guy, huh?" "Very," I replied, my voice calm, my hands folded. But inside me something had shifted. It wasn't attraction, not in the usual sense. It was recognition. Lucas had seen something in me that I hadn't felt in years, maybe since before the kids, before the routine, before I stopped wondering if anyone still noticed. That night, as Ethan slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling for hours. The memory of Lucas's gaze lingered. Not invasive, not inappropriate, just awake, present, a reminder of who I used to be. Of who I might still be. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the peaceful way I usually found comforting. It was the kind of quiet that fills your ears with your own thoughts like a lingering echo you can't silence. I went through the motions, morning coffee, tidying up, evening walks, but I couldn't shake the way Lucas had looked at me. It wasn't fantasy. It wasn't obsession, but it was present, persistent. Ethan didn't bring him up again, not even in passing. And I didn't ask. I told myself that meant nothing, that it was just dinner, that Lucas had probably forgotten the whole evening. But deep down I wasn't so sure. One afternoon about a week later I went to the market. The little 1-2 neighborhoods over. I liked it because it wasn't crowded, and the produce always looked like someone actually cared about how it was displayed. I had just picked up a bundle of fresh basil when I heard someone behind me say, "That's the best pick for late summer. Goes great with lemon pasta." I turned around and there he was, Lucas, dressed in jeans and a charcoal polo, a shopping basket casually hooked in the crook of his arm, smiling like we were old friends who ran into each other all the time. I felt the pulse in my neck quicken. "Hello," I said too quietly. I cleared my throat. "Nice to see you." "Likewise," he said, his tone even, but there was that same warmth in his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I come for the tomatoes," I said, gesturing toward the baskets. "The ones at our local store are always mushy. Good taste." Clearly, he looked down at his basket. "I'm trying to learn how to cook again. Long overdue." I smiled, unsure what to say. There was a pause. Not awkward, just full. "I've thought about that dinner a few times," he said finally. "Not just the food, the way you carry a room. You have a grounding presence." That word grounding It hit me in a way I didn't expect. I always thought of myself as dependable, stable. But the way he said it made it sound desirable, like something worth noticing. I glanced away, pretending to focus on a stack of lemons. "You're kind to say that." "It's not kindness," he said. "It's just true." We stood there for a second too long. I could feel it again. The pull, subtle and quiet, but undeniable. "I should finish shopping," I said, voice tight. Of course he smiled again. "Maybe. If Ethan's ever busy and you feel like sharing more of that lemon pasta, I'd be honored." I didn't answer. I just gave a polite nod and turned away, heart thudding in my chest. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked down the aisle. Not leering, not disrespectful, just aware. That night, I didn't tell Ethan I ran into Lucas. Not out of guilt, but because I knew he wouldn't hear what I wasn't saying. He'd just nod, maybe ask what he was buying, and move on to a weather report or the price of gas. And I wanted someone to hear me. A few days later, Ethan had to leave town for a conference. He used to ask if I wanted to tag along, make it a mini getaway, but somewhere along the years we both stopped offering those gestures. Now it was just routine. "You'll be okay without me for 2 nights?" he asked, only half choking. "Of course," I said. "It'll be nice to have the house to myself for a bit." He kissed my cheek, wheeled his little suitcase to the car and was gone. By late afternoon the house felt too quiet, not peaceful but hollow. I put on some soft jazz, poured myself a glass of wine, and started chopping garlic for that lemon pasta I had mentioned at the store. Halfway through I paused. I stared at the basil leaves, the lemon rind, the empty second plate beside the stove. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I picked up my phone. I didn't text him. That would have felt like too much, but I scrolled, found his name in the contacts Ethan had once given me to coordinate that dinner, and stared at it. My finger hovered. Then I called. He answered on the second ring. "Sophia," he said, calm but curious. "I made the pasta," I said. "Too much for one." There was a pause. "Would it be all right if I stopped by?" he asked, his voice low. I exhaled slowly. "Yes." When I opened the door 20 minutes later, he stood there with a bottle of wine in his hand and something gentle in his expression. He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't even step in too quickly. He just waited. I stepped aside, let him in. And in that moment, I knew something had already changed. Not because of what would happen that night, but because of what already had. Something had awakened. Not recklessness. Not disloyalty, just the simple aching need to be seen again, not as a wife, not as a role, but as a woman. Dinner was quiet at first. Lucas sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same one where I had hosted him days earlier with Ethan, but this time the space felt more intimate, like the air between us had thickened somehow. The only light came from the small lamp on the counter and the flicker of the candle I had lit without thinking, out of habit or maybe nervous energy. The jazz still played softly in the background, the kind of music that fills silences without demanding attention. He twirled a fork full of pasta and said, "You weren't exaggerating. This is incredible." I smiled, trying to stay grounded. "It's just lemon, garlic, basil, and a little cream." He looked up. "Don't undersell it." We ate in the kind of silence that feels full rather than awkward. His presence wasn't overwhelming. In fact, it was oddly comforting. He didn't ask prying questions. He didn't allude to anything beyond the dinner. But every time our eyes met, I felt that soft pull again, like gravity but gentler. After we finished, I got up to clear the dishes. He stood to help, and this time I didn't protest. We moved around the kitchen in a kind of quiet rhythm, brushing hands once, maybe twice more than necessary. At one point he turned to hand me a plate, and I noticed how close he had gotten. "Sophia," he said, voice just above a whisper. I looked up. There was a stillness, the kind that comes before a choice. But he didn't reach for me. He didn't step closer. He just looked at me, steady, open. "I don't want to make things complicated," he said. "They already are," I replied. He nodded slowly, understanding something in my voice I hadn't meant to share out loud. "I'm not unhappy," I continued almost defensively. "Ethan's been good to me. Our life is stable." Lucas stayed quiet, his eyes kind, "But there are days," I said, my voice trailing off. "Days when I feel like I don't quite exist. Not fully. Like I'm part of the wallpaper scene but not really noticed. Do you know what I mean?" He stepped back slightly, then giving me space. Not because he was retreating, but because he was listening. "I do," he said softly. "I know that feeling better than I should." We didn't touch. We didn't even move. We just stood there, two people who had collided at the exact moment they were both silently unraveling. I poured us each another glass of wine, and we moved to the living room. We sat side by side on the couch, not touching, but close enough to share the same breath. He noticed the photo of Ethan and me on the side table, a much younger version of us on a beach, smiling, arms wrapped around each other. "You two look happy," he said. "We were," I replied, "still are in a way. It's just different now." He didn't press. Just took a slow sip of his wine. I looked at him and asked, "Why did you come tonight?" He met my eyes. "Because I wanted to see you. Not for anything else, just to see you again." That admission did something to me. It broke open a part one had been holding together with threads of obligation and habit. I leaned back against the couch, closed my eyes for a moment, and let the stillness settle between us. I could feel him beside me, not moving, not assuming, just being there. And that was more intimate than any touch. He didn't stay late. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door again. But this time there was no Ethan to interrupt, just the sound of cicadas outside and the low hum of the night. He turned to face me. I meant what I said. He told me, "You don't have to explain yourself to anyone, not even me. But if you ever need someone to talk to, someone to really listen, I'm here." I didn't respond right away. I just nodded slowly, like I was giving myself permission to believe him. Then, without hesitation, he reached out, not for a kiss, not for anything expected, but to gently brush a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered near my cheek for the briefest second. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Sophia." And just like that, he was gone again. I closed the door, leaning my back against it as I exhaled. Everything about the night had been quiet, controlled, respectful. But my body hummed with the feeling of being awake in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't about temptation. It wasn't even about romance. It was about being seen. The next morning I woke early. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for once it didn't feel like a routine. It felt like a decision. I made my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window at the small garden Ethan and I had planted years ago. The basil was still there, overgrown but holding on, kind of like me. I didn't know where things were going. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew this. Something had changed and it wasn't Lucas. It was me. Ethan returned Sunday evening just before dusk, wheeling his suitcase through the front door with a familiar thud, the sound echoing through the quiet house like it always had. I was in the kitchen folding dish towels not out of necessity, but because my hands needed something to do. He smiled when he saw me, came over, kissed my forehead and asked, "Miss me?" I smiled back. Of course, and I meant it. In my own way I had missed him. His steadiness, his dry humor, the way he always checked if the porch light was on before bed. But at the same time, something in me felt distanced, like I was standing just a little further back from the version of myself he was used to. We ate leftovers that night, and I listened to him recap the conference, the meetings, the funny incident involving someone spilling coffee on a projector. I laughed in the right places, asked the right questions, but I wasn't fully present, not because I wasn't interested, but because part of me had changed shape. I wasn't sure he could see it. I wasn't sure I wanted him to. Later, lying in bed beside him, I stared up at the ceiling again, just like I had the night Lucas left. But now it wasn't confusion or guilt that kept me awake. It was clarity. The next morning, as Ethan left for work, I handed him his lunch like I always did, kissed him on the cheek and watched him drive away. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, hands wrapped around a warm mug, staring at the garden. Then I picked up my phone and texted Lucas *, "Thank you for the other night, for listening. I don't know what this is or if it's anything at all, but I needed that. You reminded me I still exist in ways I'd forgotten." He replied a few minutes later, "You've never stopped existing. You just needed someone to remind you." And that was it. Nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate. Just two people recognizing something true in each other. I didn't see him again for weeks, but his words stayed with me. The following month, I joined a local writing group. I'd always wanted to try it. Ethan used to joke that I had stories for days. Nowhere to put them. I began journaling again too, every morning. At first it was just scribbles, thoughts, bits of emotion, but then it grew into something fuller. Essays, stories, memories I hadn't touched in years. I also started dressing differently, not provocatively, just with intention, color that felt bold, jewelry I hadn't worn in years, lipstick I forgot I even had. Ethan noticed eventually. "You look different," he said one evening as we were getting ready to meet friends for dinner. "Do I?" I replied, turning to the mirror and adjusting a gold earring. He looked at me for a beat longer than usual. "You look good," he said. "Really good." And maybe for the first time in a long while, he meant it in the present tense, not in the familiar way husbands say things after decades of marriage, but with real attention. He was seeing me again, not because I had changed who I was, but because I had remembered who I was. Lucas never made another move. He never pressured. He never brought up that night again. Eventually, Ethan and I had him over for dinner a second time months later with another colleague in tow. It was formal, pleasant, uneventful. The air between us no longer held tension. It held understanding, mutual respect, an unspoken memory quietly acknowledged, never revisited. That chapter wasn't about infidelity or scandal. It was about reflection, rediscovery, not of someone else but of myself. Ethan and I began to talk more, not just about bills or groceries, but about things we hadn't touched in years, how we changed, what we missed, what we wanted the next phase of life to look like. It wasn't a romantic transformation like in the movies. It was slow, honest, grounded, but it was real. One evening while walking through the garden, I reached down and clipped a few basil leaves. The scent rose up like it always did, sharp, green, familiar. I stood there a moment, breathing it in, and smiled because I knew that no matter what happened, whether life stayed steady or turned unexpected again, I wouldn't lose sight of myself anymore. Not because someone else saw me, but because now finally I